Chapter 240, Trying Your Luck. Good at concocting medicine, treating illnesses, and growing quite a few medicinal herbs in the sewers. Is he an apothecary? I wonder if he's a member of the life school of thought or a believer of Earth Mother. Of course, it's more likely for him to be unaffiliated. Klein listened thoughtfully, but didn't speak out carelessly. In the Lone Kingdom, due to the Church of Storms rejecting the eternal blazing sun and the god of knowledge and wisdom, while the Church of Evernight and the Church of the God of Combat were irreconcilable. As a result of this, among the foreign religions, only the Church of Earth Mother had obtained the right to preach, but under the tacit suppression from the three churches. They only had a few churches with very few believers, to the point that they didn't even need to form a team of Beyonders. And even if they did, they wouldn't be recognized by the government and couldn't cooperate with the police department. They would be considered as vigilantes. According to the confidential information of the Nighthawks, the Church of Earth Mother had two sequence paths in its control, planter and apothecary. However, the latter was apparently incomplete. The suspected apothecary didn't have his hood on. He revealed a black iron mask on his face, but it only covered the part above the bridge of his nose, making the quivering fat on his cheeks appear to stand out. I repeat, I need someone to clean up the newly appeared beast in the sewers. I only need the area around Backland Bridge cleaned up. Payment will be with 4 bottles of my precious medicine. 2 of them can effectively stop bleeding and stimulate the healing of wounds. Trust me, this is better than going to the clinic to do a suture operation, and it's effective for 6 months. The man suspected to be an apothecary stated his requirements and corresponding conditions. He suddenly let out a soft laugh and continued to describe the case. The other 2 bottles can last 1.5 months, and can allow a man to find the urges from back when he was 17 or 18 years old and become a beyonder on the bed. Hee, you know what I mean. Even if it exceeds the use-by date, it can still produce effects, but it will also spread throughout the body. The user will become abnormally violent, and their strength, speed, and agility will greatly increase before exhaustion kicks in half an hour later. Why does he look like those old military doctors who plaster their tiny advertisements everywhere, and shamelessly promoting the effects of his expired drugs? Klein couldn't help but silently lampoon. Seeing the silent room after he said his piece, the suspected apothecary could only grit his teeth and say, "I'll add 30 pounds on top of my 4 precious bottles of medicine." Finally, a man sitting somewhere along the periphery of the couches spoke up. He surveyed the area and said in a deep voice, "I accept this commission. You should pay in advance with 2 bottles of medicine, 1 of each kind. Mr. Eye of Wisdom will bear witness." "No problem," said an elder seated on a single sofa with a nod. The lines on his cheeks were deep, his skin a little shriveled, and his voice had an ancient quality to it, so Klein judged him to be an elderly gentleman. "All right," the suspected apothecary heaved a sigh of relief. After the conclusion of this transaction, the gathering seemed to turn more lively. Soon, a woman with her face completely covered by a hood said, "I want to sell 2 weapons." "Weapons?" Klein adjusted his posture and became more focused. Since he was temporarily unable to advance, he could only increase his strength by using external items. One of them is an inscribed steel sword. It was smithed by the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. It comes with purifying and evil warding effects. It's the nemesis of water ghosts, wraiths, zombies, and other undead creatures. It can still be used for another 3 years. Of course, its sharpness is enough to kill. The woman's voice fluctuated in volume, a clear attempt to hide her characteristics. 500 pounds or the Sequence 8 potion, Barbarian, and it will be yours. How expensive. For me, there's no reason I must have it. If I were to encounter an undead that I'm currently unable to deal with, blowing the whistle is the best solution. Even without Mr. Azik, the messenger alone should be able to intimidate many undead creatures. Klein shook his head and listened to the lady's introduction of the second weapon. Meat cleaver with exquisite mechanical structure. It can be transformed, making it easy to carry. This is a combat weapon made by an outstanding craftsman. It's rarely seen and will cost 25 pounds. There sure is a huge difference in pricing between weapons with Beyonder effects and those without. Klein watched from the sidelines until the steel sword was bought by a sullen gentleman in another corner, and the meat cleaver became part of Mr. Eye of Wisdom's collection. There were successes and failures in the few deals that followed. The only thing that tempted Klein was a fortune accessory, a beyonder item that could make a person's luck with fortune rise for 3 months. However, this wasn't his main goal, and the price wasn't that great. Seeing that the atmosphere had turned silent once again, he slowly exhaled and said in a suppressed voice, "I want to sell something." After attracting everyone's attention, he took out an iron cigar case and pushed out the crimson Beyonder characteristic, which resembled jelly. Without needing to organizing his words, he introduced it with something he had already prepared ahead of time. "This is something I obtained from a corpse. I'm not sure what use it has. It's just that I find it very magical. Maybe some of you know what this is." Klein deliberately didn't mention that this was a Beyonder characteristic, nor did he mention that the crimson jelly in his hand could replace the main ingredient of the hunter potion. This involved the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility, and he didn't want to benefit the members of this Beyonder gathering with this knowledge. In addition to this, Klein had the intention of probing to see if anyone there knew the law of Beyonder characteristics' indestructibility. Such a person would definitely be stronger than the rest, or perhaps someone with a powerful background, making them suitable as a bodyguard. At the same time, he continued to disguise himself as an ordinary person who didn't know much about the Beyonder community. Although the members of the gathering couldn't see his appearance through the iron mask, Kaspars Kalinin knew what he looked like, and quite a few people in the room probably knew Kaspars. Being careful and prudent were the two things Klein had emphasized to himself before leaving home today. Gazes examined the crimson object in his hand, but Klein wasn't a spectator and couldn't tell what they meant. After more than 10 seconds, no one spoke. The room was as quiet as a cemetery. At this moment, the old gentleman sitting on the sofa, Mr. Eye of Wisdom, coughed and said, "I have a rough idea of what it is and what it does, but knowledge needs to be exchanged with something in return. I'll pay £400, believe me, it's a perfectly fair price. Of course, you have the right to refuse. The main ingredients of Sequence 9 potions are about £150 to £200. 2 are needed, and they add up to about £400. The offer is very reasonable." This old gentleman with the code name Eye of Wisdom seems to recognize that this belongs to the hunter sequence. He had no need for divination, and he was able to recognize it immediately. Could it be the Sequence 7 of the Sequencer's pathway, Appraiser? Klein thought for a moment and said, "Deal. However, sir, you don't need to rush to pay. I still have another request." "What request?" Eye of Wisdom asked in an old voice. Klein pondered and said, "The thing is, I offended someone. According to your circle, he should be Sequence 6 or maybe 5. I wish to hire a bodyguard." "Sequence 6, maybe Sequence 5? Why don't you just die quietly? If we reach that level, why would we be attending such a small gathering?" The suspected apothecary blurted out with a bit of a sneer in his astonishment. Although the other members of the party didn't say anything, from the looks of it, no one planned on accepting the request. Their thoughts were similar to those of the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, "Maybe you don't know our circle well enough. People at Sequence 6 or Sequence 5 are very, very powerful and terrifying people. Yes, there have been many cases of a lot of Sequence 8 and Sequence 9 Beyonders killing someone that strong, but those are events that are still very hard to replicate. I think no one here is willing to take such a huge risk to protect you. If you're certain that the other party is only Sequence 6 and doesn't have any mystical items, there might be someone who will want to accept the challenge this mission entails." "Well, I'm not sure," Klein shrugged and said, "then I'll have to try to save myself. What can I get for £400? The mystical item you were talking about." "Believe me, a mystical item worth £400 certainly won't be able to deal with your enemy, and it will even bring you more danger. I suggest that you apologize to him. Sincerely apologize, and perhaps £400 will be enough to buy his understanding," Eye of Wisdom said sincerely. "Frankly, I've thought about it, but I don't think they'll accept it." Klein was about to answer when the man who had accepted the task of cleaning the sewer beast suddenly laughed. Maybe you can try your luck. I have a mystical item here that I can sell you for 400 pounds. It can let you hear the voice of a great being. If you're lucky and can decipher some useful information, you'll become very powerful, and it will no longer be difficult for you to protect yourself. Well, if you're unlucky and end up deciphering a curse or fail to decipher it, then you'll be hurt or even end up dying. Do you want to take the gamble? Before he could finish his sentence, Eye of Wisdom growled, Black Snake, don't mention that ominous item of yours. Black Snake laughed and said, I'm not lying, I'm not violating the rules here either. I told him about the advantages and disadvantages and left him to make his own choice. The probability of getting useful information is approximately 10%. Do you want to take the gamble? The Russian roulette of the Beyonder world, hearing the voice of a great being. Is this the Aurora Order's listener, an item left behind after a listener lost control? Klein looked at Black Snake, that he suspected to be a member of the Aurora Order, and made many connections. Perhaps I can bet on it? No, I can't call it a bet because I'll bring this item to the world above the gray fog before using it. I can already bring real objects there. This way, I can avoid most of the danger. However, this is only an item left behind by a Sequence 8 Beyonder. The corresponding benefit might not be that good. 400 pounds isn't cheap. As his thoughts raced through his mind, Klein nodded solemnly and said, Deal.